The Galactic Council chamber hummed with an almost palpable sense of self-importance. Around the enormous obsidian table sat representatives from across known space, each a monument to their species' particular brand of, well, alienness. There were the krill, aquatic militarists who communicated in complex clicks and whistles, their gills fluttering with barely contained impatience. The Xylar, a hive-mind collective represented by a single, particularly bulbous specimen, oozed a viscous fluid that smelled faintly of ozone and disapproval. And of course, the perpetually offended Xylar, whose 8 eyes darted around, searching for any slight, real or imagined, to their glorious empire. They were united in their dedication to logic, order, and the unwavering belief in their own intellectual superiority. Or at least, they liked to think so. Enter Ambassador Davies. He slouched into the chamber, a crumpled mess of a human in a suit that looked like it had lost a fight with a space slug. His tie was askew, his hair a disaster. He carried a travel mug emblazoned with a picture of a cat doing something deeply undignified. He was, in short, everything the Galactic Council detested. Davies took his seat, offered a breezy "mornin'," and proceeded to take a long, loud slurp from his mug. The krill twitched. The Xylar pulsed a little faster. The Xylar probably saw at least 3 major insults in the simple act of drinking a beverage. But Davies remained blissfully unaware, or perhaps deliberately uncaring, of the silent storm he was brewing. He was their designated human representative, a position given to humanity more out of pity than any actual respect. Humans, they believed, were unpredictable, illogical, and prone to wearing clothing that clashed horribly with the general aesthetic of the galaxy. Davies, in particular, was about to be tested. The Council had summoned him not for pleasantries, but to address a problem so complex, so utterly baffling, that it had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy for centuries. A challenge was about to be laid at his feet, a challenge that would either prove humanity's worth or cement their reputation as the weird, coffee-addicted cousins of the cosmos. And Davies, still sipping his lukewarm brew, hadn't got a clue what was coming. The problem was the Xylar Conundrum. The Xylar themselves were special. A race of hypersensitive beings, they existed in a perpetual state of anxiety, their bodies shimmering with iridescent colors that shifted with their moods, mostly shades of anxious violet and vaguely nauseous green. Their technology, while impressively advanced, was riddled with bizarre quirks, a direct reflection of their collective neuroses. For centuries, the Galactic Council had been trying to understand, let alone fix, a critical malfunction in the Xylar's primary energy grid. This grid, you see, powered everything from their climate control systems, essential for maintaining the Xylar's delicate emotional balance, to their interstellar communication arrays, crucial for spreading their anxieties to other galaxies. The malfunction manifested as unpredictable energy surges, causing widespread chaos and, according to the Xylar, existential dread. Teams of krill engineers had attempted to impose rigid, militaristic solutions, only to be met with technological resistance as baffling as the Xylar's own illogical fears. The Xylar collective had tried to assimilate with the grid, hoping to understand its inner workings through shared consciousness, but had instead returned traumatized, muttering about the existential static and promptly requiring a millennia-long period of mental isolation. The Xylar naturally blamed the whole thing on inferior design, despite having no understanding of the underlying principles. The Council had thrown resources, intellect, and countless hours at the problem, all to no avail. The Xylar continued to shimmer anxiously, their technology continued to malfunction, and the Council's collective frustration grew with each passing failed attempt. They were at their wits' end and rapidly running out of patience for both the problem, and more specifically, the Xylar themselves. The iridescent aliens were starting to get on everyone's nerves. Even the perpetually serene Xylar were beginning to secrete slightly more ozone than usual. The Council needed a solution, and they needed it fast, before the Xylar's collective anxiety caused a galaxy-wide panic attack. It was, quite simply, a mess of intergalactic proportions. Ambassador Davies, meanwhile, had been observing the proceedings with an air that could only be described as detached amusement. During one particularly heated debate, filled with frantic pronouncements and frustrated gestures, he leaned back in his chair, stifled a yawn, and casually offered, hey, has anyone tried just, turning it off and on again?" A stunned silence fell over the council chamber. The Krill general's mandibles twitched in barely suppressed rage. The Xylar collective buzzed with incredulous disbelief. Even the perpetually anxious Xylar momentarily ceased their shimmering, their violet hues deepening to a shade of bewildered purple. The Grand Poobah of the Glar, a being of immense intellectual arrogance, finally found his voice, dripping with condescension. "Ambassador Davies," he boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "With all due respect, are you suggesting that a problem of this magnitude, a conundrum that has baffled the greatest minds in the galaxy for centuries, could be resolved with such a pedestrian solution?" Davies shrugged, a gesture that the council found deeply unsettling in its lack of ceremony. "Well, yeah," he said, scratching his head. "I mean, it works for my toaster, and my TV, and pretty much everything back home. Sometimes, you just gotta give the electrons a little reboot, I guess." The Krill general slammed a metallic fist on the table, his voice a low growl. "Human simplicity is insulting. We have disassembled the quantum matrix, analyzed the subatomic fluctuations, and reconfigured the energy pathways. Your reboot is an affront to scientific progress." The Xylar, recovering from their initial shock, added their collective voice to the chorus of disapproval. "Such a simplistic approach is illogical. The Xylar energy grid is a complex, interconnected system, far beyond the comprehension of such primitive methods." The Xylar predictably began to shimmer more frantically. "What if turning it off makes it worse?" one of them squeaked, his voice trembling with existential fear. "What if it destroys the entire system? What if it causes a ripple effect that unravels the very fabric of reality?" Davies, unfazed by the alien outrage, simply shrugged again. "Look, I'm just saying," he drawled. "It's worth a shot, right? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's already broken, isn't it? I've got a coffee date with an Andromeda ornithologist in an hour, so if you don't mind." The council, though outwardly dismissive, couldn't shake Davies's suggestion. The sheer audacity of its simplicity gnawed at their collective consciousness. Could a solution so mundane actually hold the key to the Xylar Conundrum? Pride warred with the nagging possibility that they had overlooked something fundamentally obvious. Under the cover of bureaucratic secrecy, the Grand Poobah authorized a clandestine test. A team of highly specialized Xylar technicians, sworn to absolute silence, were tasked with implementing Davies's reboot on a secluded section of the Xylar energy grid. They grumbled and protested, their delicate sensory antennae twitching in protest at such a barbaric act. But orders were orders. With trembling appendages, the Xylar initiated the shutdown sequence. The hum of the Xylar energy grid sputtered, then died, plunging the test chamber into an eerie silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The technicians exchanged nervous glances, their multifaceted eyes reflecting a mixture of dread and anticipation. Then, with a violent shudder, the grid sprang back to life. The energy flow, previously erratic and unstable, seemed smoother. The violet glow pulsed with a newfound rhythm. The technicians, initially skeptical, were forced to acknowledge a tangible improvement. But the celebration was short-lived. As the energy stabilized in one sector, chaos erupted elsewhere. The Xylar homeworld experienced a sudden surge in gravity, causing widespread disorientation and mild structural damage. Their shimmering patterns became erratic. Their language devolved into a series of panicked squeaks. The reboot, it seemed, had merely shifted the problem, creating a whole new set of unforeseen complications. The council convened an emergency session, the atmosphere thick with recrimination and mounting suspicion. The partial success of Davies' suggestion, combined with the bizarre side effects, fueled their paranoia. Surely this wasn't mere coincidence. This had to be a carefully orchestrated human plot, designed to destabilize the Xylar and seize control of their energy resources. The Krill general predictably called for immediate military action. The Grand Poobah, ever the voice of relative reason, cautioned restraint. "We must proceed with caution," he boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We cannot accuse the humans without irrefutable proof. But make no mistake, this Ambassador Davies is clearly more than he appears. His simplicity is a mask, concealing a cunning intellect and a devious agenda." The decision was made. Davies would be placed under discreet surveillance, his every move scrutinized, his every word analyzed for hidden meaning. They needed to understand the true nature of the human threat before it was too late. The council chamber buzzed with barely repressed fury. Holographic displays flickered with images of gravity surges, pattern disruptions, and bewildered Xylar. The Grand Poobah, his gills twitching agitatedly, fixed Ambassador Davies with a stare that could melt tungsten. "Explain yourself, human," he bellowed, the echoes of his voice reverberating through the vast chamber. Davies, lounging casually in his anti-gravity chair, took a slow sip from his Earth-standard water bottle. "Explain what, exactly?" he asked, his tone infuriatingly nonchalant. "The fact that you're... what did you call it? The Xylar Conundrum? Was fixed with the equivalent of turning it off and on again?" He shrugged. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best." The Krill general slammed a clawed fist on the table, the metallic clang echoing ominously. "Do not play coy with us, human. Your simple solution has triggered a cascade of unforeseen consequences. Gravity fluctuations, linguistic degradation. The Xylar are practically vibrating with confusion." Davies sighed dramatically. "Okay, look, maybe I should explain what that thing actually is." He leaned forward, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "That complex technological marvel you've been agonizing over for centuries? It's a beverage dispenser." A collective gasp swept through the council chamber. The Grand Poobah's gills fluttered in disbelief. "A beverage dispenser?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Preposterous. It harnesses the very fabric of space-time. It channels interdimensional energy flows." Davies chuckled, a sound that grated on the aliens' highly sensitive auditory receptors. "Yeah, well, on Earth we call that a coffee machine. A really, really fancy one, I guess, but still, basically, it just makes caffeinated drinks." He paused, letting the absurdity of the situation sink in. "And the gravity fluctuations and linguistic degradation? Those are just side effects." "Side effects?" the Zglorg science minister shrieked, his antennae quivering violently. "Side effects of what, pray tell? Exposing oneself to a concentrated burst of space-time energy?" Davies scratched his head. "Nah, side effects of the ingredients. See, the Xylar, they're using some pretty exotic stuff to brew their, space coffee. The gravity thing? That's probably the fermented flargon berries. And the language issues? Blame the gleep sap. Makes you slur your words even if your words are shimmering light patterns." He elaborated. "The problem you were facing was just like a basic glitch. Happens all the time back home. A little cosmic dust gets into the system, clogs up the hyperfilters, and bam, no more space latte. That's why I suggested a reboot. Clears the pipes, gets everything flowing again." The Krill general sputtered. "So you are telling us that we, the Galactic Council, have wasted centuries, trying to solve a problem that could be fixed by a glorified alien barista?" Davies grinned, unfazed by the general's outrage. "Pretty much, yeah. Though to be fair," he added, "it is a pretty complicated beverage dispenser. You guys really over-engineered the thing." He paused. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, can you set it to make an Earth-style espresso? This recycled nutrient, paste they call coffee here, is killing me." The Grand Poobah's face, or whatever passed for a face on his species, turned a shade of purple previously unknown in the known universe. The council members exchanged horrified glances. The weight of their collective embarrassment pressing down on them like a collapsing star. Centuries of research, countless simulations, the very best minds in the galaxy, all dedicated to fixing a malfunctioning coffee machine. A frantic attempt at damage control began. The Krill General barked orders to scrub all records of the Xylar Conundrum, to erase the term from every database, to rewrite history itself if necessary. The Xylar Science Minister frantically tried to reclassify the Beverage Dispenser as a highly advanced interdimensional research device, but his explanations sounded increasingly hollow, even to his own multifaceted brain. Then, disaster struck. Davies, oblivious to the chaos he had unleashed, wandered over to the interdimensional research device and started fiddling with the controls. "Hey, mind if I try something?" he asked, his voice echoing through the tense chamber. Before anyone could stop him, he pressed a series of buttons, adjusted a few dials, and with a gentle whir, the machine sputtered to life, dispensing a steaming cup of something. "All right," Davies exclaimed, taking a tentative sip. "Now, that's what I call a coffee." The aroma, a rich, complex blend of roasted flargon berries and gleep sap, filled the council chamber, subtly different from the usual Xylar brew. Council members, despite their best efforts to remain stoic, found themselves irresistibly drawn to the scent. The Xylar Science Minister, his antennae twitching uncontrollably, was the first to break ranks. He shuffled towards Davies, his many eyes wide with curiosity. What is that?" he stammered. Davies grinned, holding out the cup. "Try it. It's an Earth-style blend. Little stronger, little more awake." The Xylar hesitantly took the cup, took a sip, and his multifaceted brain exploded with a symphony of new sensations. He had never experienced anything like it. "More!" he shrieked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I require more." And that was the beginning of the end. Within days, the Earth-style coffee became the must-have drink across the galaxy. Every species, from the stoic krill to the ethereal Luminians, was clamoring for a taste of the human concoction. The Xylar, initially horrified by the sudden interest in their conundrum, found themselves overwhelmed with orders. The problem was only Davies seemed to understand how the machine really worked. The Xylar's meticulous engineering was useless when faced with a simple, clogged filter or a slightly off-kilter gravity regulator. And humans back on Earth, upon learning of this galactic coffee craze, were only too happy to consult, for a very reasonable fee, of course. The Galactic Council found itself in a humiliating position. They, the leaders of the galaxy, were now entirely dependent on a single human and his frankly baffling knowledge of coffee machines. The Krill General, now sporting a permanent caffeine twitch, was forced to swallow his pride and personally request Davies' assistance in unclogging a particularly stubborn hyperfilter. The Grand Poobah, his gills now permanently stained a shade of earth coffee brown, could only shake his head in weary resignation. The galaxy had changed forever, all because of a simple cup of coffee and a human who knew how to turn things off and on again. Davies, meanwhile, was basking in the glow of reluctant heroism. He hadn't set out to change the galaxy, he just wanted a decent cup of coffee. Now he was the most sought-after consultant in known space, his advice more valuable than a planet-sized diamond. The Galactic Council, once dismissive of humanity's primitive technology, was now utterly dependent on it. Every time a hyperfilter clogged or a gravity regulator went haywire, they had to swallow their pride and call Davies. The Krill General, his caffeine addiction now fully entrenched, even started carrying a travel-sized coffee maker, just in case of emergencies. The Xylar Science Minister, now a certified coffee connoisseur, dedicated his considerable intellect to studying the nuances of Earth-style brewing. He published a 700-volume treatise on the optimal bean-to-water ratio, which was immediately dismissed by Davies as way too complicated. "Just eyeball it," Davies advised, much to the Xylar's utter bafflement. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Humanity, once considered a minor player, now held a trump card: the knowledge of how to make a decent cup of coffee, and more importantly, how to fix the infernal machines that dispensed it. The council chambers, once filled with the sterile hum of advanced technology, now reeked of roasted coffee beans. Emergency sessions were frequently interrupted by caffeine. Cravings and diplomatic treaties were often negotiated over steaming cups of flargon berry latte. The galaxy had entered a new era, an era of caffeinated diplomacy and human ingenuity. Even the Xylar, initially overwhelmed by the demand for their once-ignored conundrum, began to adapt. They started experimenting with new flavors, new blends, even new brewing techniques inspired by Davies' seemingly random tinkering. They discovered the joys of latte art, the subtle art of the foam swirl, and the profound satisfaction of a perfectly pulled espresso shot. The Xylar Conundrum, once a symbol of technological stagnation, became a symbol of innovation and cultural exchange. Years passed. The galaxy ran on coffee, literally. Trade routes shifted to accommodate the flow of beans. Planets specialized in weird and wonderful coffee additives, from the aforementioned flargon berry to crystallized nebula dust. The Galactic Standard Calendar was even subtly altered. Before, it was meticulously calculated based on planetary rotations and cosmic events. Now, it was based on coffee breaks. Pre-caffeine crisis, mid-morning buzz, and post-lunch slump became universally understood markers of time. Davies, though, remained largely unchanged. He still wore the same slightly rumpled shirt, still offered the same sardonic smile, and still just wanted a decent cup of alien coffee. This proved to be a surprisingly elusive goal. One day, sipping a suspiciously green concoction offered by a well-meaning Xylar barista, he sighed. "You know," he said, "for a galaxy this advanced, you'd think someone could figure out how to make a simple black coffee." He shook his head, a twinkle in his eye. The coffee revolution wasn't over. Not by a long shot.